there. It is a Monday again. We are down to our final stretch here, really just 10 days more if you don't count today, because today is December 14th. So here we are with day 14. Kind of a cute little, almost snowy sort of look to that box, which is fitting because today's tea is called Snow Day. So Snow Day here is going to require 95 degrees Celsius and at least 5 minutes. Now, interestingly, this does actually have 1 pip of caffeine, but again, with that 5-minute steep required, I'm going to go ahead and do the smell and get that going so I can actually get the proper steep. All right, so this has some very chocolate and mint notes to it, so it's not nearly as nicely minty as even the North African mint tea, and so obviously very not at all like the Candy Cane Crush. So those are the notes that I'm getting, and that is because this tea does have peppermint, cocoa beans, cocoa husk, chocolate drops, white chocolate pieces, sugar sprinkles, natural sweet blackberry leaf and chocolate flavoring, artificial cream flavoring, and natural peppermint oil. So this is a pretty finely grained tea here. There we go. It's gonna slip right out of a tea ball probably, which, you know, is again fine. I just don't like having all those tea particles in my tea. So I've got my tea bag ready to go. As I'm looking at this, I'm seeing those sugar sprinkles. I'm seeing potentially some little ground bits of chocolate in here. And I'm seeing a lot of green, which I would assume is the peppermint leaf, actually. So that's kind of nice to see that we've got a lot more peppermint leaf in this guy. Yeah, I'm not necessarily sure where I'm going to see cocoa husk versus actual chocolate drops, and this poll here didn't have any of the white chocolate pieces either. And of course, white chocolate probably means that I'm going to end up with some of that oil from the white chocolate on the surface of my tea, but I'm getting used to that. It's going to be okay. Just have a mess going on here. This was a pretty full canister, so I'm not going to use all of it so that I can... Ooh, look, I found a chocolate drop. Okay. Come here. It's just a tiny, tiny, tiny little chocolate chip. And that is actually a regular chocolate chip. I know it looked a little whitish there, but it's just because it's been kind of hanging around. Probably some of the cocoa solids are separating from the cocoa butter, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. So let's go ahead and get that there. We're going to measure. All that steam rising straight up to the camera. It's going to be great for it. Could just be me, but this one looks like it pretty immediately was ready to turn green on me, which is fine. Just a little confused by this tea, honestly. And I am confused by this tea because, again, it's that 5+ minute steep, which usually indicates to us that we have something that is herbal, but then it's got the 1 pip of caffeine, which often indicates that we actually have something that's real tea. Now, the caffeine actually comes from the cocoa in here and the chocolate in here, so that's why there's that 1 pip there. But this is a completely herbal tea. I didn't list any tea in this particular set of ingredients, so we've got that going on. Excuse me. You know, that's kind of an interesting setup here, but as we consider the ingredients for today, I really don't have a lot to talk about in that list left. I've already talked about peppermint. I have already talked about natural blackberry leaf or the sweet blackberry leaf there, and so that really means that I'm left talking about cocoa chocolate, which is totally fine. I thought that maybe I might be able to talk about sprinkles, like the history of sprinkles and why we have them. But based on the notes that I took down on chocolate, that's definitely not going to happen. We're going to try to get through this as quickly as I can, so that way maybe I can actually achieve my goal of having a slightly shorter video. I don't know. I do know that there's going to be one tea coming up at some point that will be a shorter video. Maybe. It's that teacher background, teacher lecturing. I will find a way to talk about everything and, drone on and on and on. Anyway, so today's tea, as I noted in the ingredient list, does use cocoa beans, cocoa husks, and chocolate chips. So I want to try to keep it pretty high level just because we have different forms of cocoa being used in this particular tea, not to mention those little white chocolate pieces. But let's get to it. Cocoa beans, as you probably know, are also called cacao beans, and they come from the cacao tree, cocoa tree. The scientific name for that is Theobroma cacao. And the cocoa beans that we actually consume are, in fact, fermented. So there you go. We like to ferment things and preserve them. That's one reason why fermenting even happened. Now, these seeds are then processed in such a way that we extract the cocoa solids, which is the non-fat stuff, and then the actual cocoa butter, which is the fat, and we then use the different parts in different combinations, different amounts, to actually create our chocolate products. Quick note about cocoa butter. So that fatty part, this is going to be, I think, not quick at all, but, we'll pretend. Cocoa butter is also called Theobroma oil, and it's a pale yellow color that's used for all chocolates, doesn't matter what kind. It is also used for ointments, toiletries, and even some pharmaceuticals with that cocoa flavor and aroma, so that's often a selling point for it. The melting point of cocoa butter is just below human body temperature, which is why it's potentially really disastrous to give your child a piece of chocolate, because if they put it in their pocket, it's going to melt all over their pocket. Interestingly, that low melting point below that human body temperature is actually one reason why cocoa butter is a really popular base for certain medicinal suppositories. So think about that the next time you decide that you want cocoa butter on your body there. Cocoa butter, as I said, is used in pretty much all forms of chocolate. Again, differing amounts are going to help you get different kinds of consistencies and different flavor profiles. Dark chocolate's going to have a little bit less of it, whereas white chocolate is entirely pretty much cocoa butter. In fact, the only part of the cocoa bean that white chocolate uses is cocoa butter. Then they add sugar and milk to it, and that's what gives you the white chocolate. And so basically you are eating sugar milk fat, and it has that nice sort of cocoa-y flavor, but not really. So, yum. White chocolate is basically just straight fat. So, there are people I know that I live with, my husband, namely, who then, because of that, will say that white chocolate is actually not real chocolate. It is. It uses parts of the cocoa beans, so it's real chocolate. Let's just accept that. It's just potentially not going to be as rich or as flavorful, depending on, again, what kinds of flavor profiles you're looking for. Now, cocoa butter does actually have really good stability because of the different antioxidants that are in it, and so it actually gives it a storage life of 2 to 5 years, which is kind of rare for a fat that has such a low melting point. And it's actually really cost effective for manufacturers, so it's being really put into high demand. There are actually a lot of people who are also health conscious who are looking more for cocoa butter and its use in lotions and other products that way. So the demand for cocoa butter is actually expected to surge over the next, starting in 2019 up through 2028. It's expected to reach $2.5 billion over that entire time frame. So there's your unasked for and unexpected investment advice, I guess. I don't even know how you would go about investing in cocoa butter, but I guess do it. Anyway, the cacao tree is actually native to the Amazon basin, so South America. And this is a leading reason for the use of cacao in many of the Mesoamerican dishes and drinks, and why you find it across a lot of the cultural record dating back thousands of years in that region. You can actually also find cocoa trees, either way, in the foothills of the Andes in the Amazon and Orinoco basins, which are in the northern part of South America, in Colombia and in Venezuela. And you can actually, in that region, find wild cacao trees, which kind of gives some insight into how widespread these trees used to be prior to the Spanish conquest of the region, and then the actual cultivation or forced migration and of the plants into more controlled cultivation regions. There is evidence that cacao trees were domesticated by the Olmecs in Mexico, and that they're the first group of people to domesticate cacao trees, at least in Central America. And then it was consumed by a lot of those pre-Hispanic cultures, including the Maya. However, even before that time, which was about 4,000 years ago, there is new evidence as of 2018 that suggests that the domestication actually started in equatorial South America 1,500 years earlier than when we see it in the Olmec culture. So it's basically something that started south and then kind of migrated north, as you have that exchange of cultures and ideas, which was still common even pre-European influence. You've got the Aztecs, who were common in that Central America society or region, and then you've got the Inca, who were common in the South American area, and they're known for having these great, huge empires that conquered other tribes and nations. And so, of course, you're going to have this exchange of ideas, and you're going to absorb things, even from cultures that you end up taking over. So that explains some of that migration of the cultivation trends. Now, in Ecuador, this is actually where we have that set of evidence. It's from the Santa Ana La Florida, which is an archaeological site that dates back to 3500 BCE. That's where the artifacts were found that suggest that it's the Mayo Chinchipe people who began cultivating cacao around 5,300 years ago. And then there's other evidence that shows that cacao products were consumed in Honduras around 1,500 to 1,700 years ago, and that's pretty much when that region first kind of accepted cacao as a main product. Now, what's interesting, of course, is even before the flavor of the bean became popular, and again, the flavor of the bean is what we eat as chocolate now, these cultures actually used the pulp of the chocolate fruit in a fermented alcoholic drink, and that was really actually quite popular and really common around them. And there's also evidence to suggest that the beans were a common currency before the Spanish conquest. So again, trading of ideas, trading of goods and services as some sort of economy. Now what's interesting is, I say a lot of things are interesting. You could do a drinking game to every time I say something's interesting. Don't do that. That's probably bad. Anyway, the scientific name Theobroma came from I believe it was a Swiss guy or Swedish guy named Carl, and he named it Theobroma, and Theobroma really just translates to food of the gods, and that is a fascinating correspondence between when these early pre-Hispanic cultures were using the cacao tree in their food and in their consumption. It was actually largely part of spiritual rituals. So it makes sense to then connect it to food of the gods because there's a spiritual connection there. So if you've ever really felt that enjoying your chocolate was really a divine, heavenly experience, you're in good company. Now, although the plant is native to South America, it can and does grow elsewhere along the equator, with 70% of the global crop coming from West Africa now. Now, chocolate did make its way to Europe thanks to the Spaniards who came in and then conquered that region. And by the mid-17th century, chocolate was a popular beverage. And thanks to the Spanish, the cacao tree also then came to the West Indies and the Philippines, and then it went to those other regions, including West Africa and regions in Asia, thanks to other Europeans who went out and did their own exploring. There are currently 3 main varieties of cacao plant. There's the Forastero, Criollo, and Trinitario. The Forastero makes up 80 to 90% of the world production of cacao. The Criollo cocoa beans are really rare and are considered a delicacy because so few countries actually still produce it. And that's actually because they have significantly lower yields of crop from those plants, and it's a lot more disease prone. So it's not necessarily worth the investment and the time and care to get that particular crop. It's just not nearly as efficient. So predominantly it's Venezuela that produces the Criollo to this day. The Forastero is actually hybridized with Criollo to create the Trinitario, and the Trinitario comes from Trinidad, so one of those islands in what we would consider the West Indies region. It's in the Caribbean. And that Trinitario hybrid plant is actually considered a higher quality than Forastero. It has higher yields than the Forastero, and it's even more disease resistant than the Criollo. So it basically takes the best of all parts of both plants and maximizes on it. So I'm personally wondering why we don't see more of the Trinitario in production and in consumption, but I have no idea. Maybe it's just that it's not easy to grow outside of Trinidad. Who knows? Now, currently, with regards to chocolate, because I mentioned this in an earlier video, that when it comes to chocolate, I do personally try to buy things that are fair trade or part of the Rainforest Alliance, those kinds of things, because I want to try to not be purchasing chocolate that comes from slave labor. Currently, there are multiple international and national initiatives that support sustainable cocoa production. There's Swissco, which is the Swiss platform, the GISCO, which is the German initiative, and Beyond Chocolate, which comes from Belgium. And those 3 initiatives had worked together and then signed a memorandum as of this year, so 2020, and they are measuring and addressing issues like child labor, living wages, deforestation, and supply chain transparency. So they are really working together to try and keep track of that and to mitigate that impact and really make cocoa production and consumption a little bit more sustainable. There are other partnerships such as the International Cocoa Organization, ICCO, and the Ghanaian Cocoa Authority, and they work to increase the proportion of sustainable cocoa importation to Switzerland from Ghana, and they're looking to get that up to 80% sustainable by 2025. So they're, again, looking at what can we do to make things a little bit better for the environment and for the people involved in cultivating chocolate. There's a lot going on in terms of chocolate with fair trade, which I've talked about. And then, of course, I mentioned Rainforest Alliance. And the Rainforest Alliance is an international organization based in New York and Amsterdam, and it has operations in more than 60 countries. It was founded in 1987 with the main mission to really work towards sustainable forestry, agriculture, and tourism. What's interesting about the Rainforest Alliance when it comes to trade and that agriculture is that it does not offer a minimum price guarantee. So producers end up actually a lot more vulnerable to the market variations, and that's come under some different criticisms. However, The Economist actually says that by not guaranteeing that price minimum, producers are actually more incentivized to produce a higher quality, because if they want to compete in the market, they have to have something that's worthy of being competitive rather than being guaranteed a base price for it just because they're part of that particular alliance. And there are third-party studies that have shown that the Rainforest Alliance approach to improving the entire spectrum of farming practices overall, rather than like guaranteeing certification and price minimums, that it's actually been effective in raising the income and net revenue for farmers overall. There are some other negatives that people have pointed out. Some claim that the standards for the Rainforest Alliance are far lower than those of fair trades, and that their requirements only mandate paying the laborers that minimum wage, which is really not quite as acceptable. The Rainforest Alliance has actually come under attack through some lawsuits as well. There was a 2014 lawsuit that claimed there was unfair advertising due to Chiquita banana suppliers and the drinking water conditions involving a lot of fertilizer, and then claiming that the Rainforest Alliance was only requiring 30% of the ingredients in a particular product to meet the standards that they had in place. Now the Rainforest Alliance does actually stand by their practices and their audits and things like that, but there have been accusations of greenwashing, also in Costa Rica. But again, they stand by their practices, even though people in those countries do claim that the audits are not nearly as rigorous as they should be to actually catch any of these violations. I really love the idea of the Rainforest Alliance. I think improving practices and farming trends and sustainability overall is a really beautiful, wonderful idea. I hope that they and fair trade continue to actually work towards a true measure of standardized sustainability and equity and fair practices all around. It's a little discouraging to find yet another thing that I thought was a good thing is in many ways just another hoop to jump through and another way to pay to use the label and all of that. But that's not a critique against David's Tea. David's Tea does not have this tea that I'm drinking today associated with the Rainforest Alliance. I'm just noting some things that are part of cocoa production and how we get our chocolate today. So again, I don't think there's anything wrong with buying things that are labeled with the Rainforest Alliance seal or fair trade seal, or I heard of one recently and my coworker told me about it and now I can't remember. It's like direct trade, something like that. And I haven't done a lot of research into that one yet, but anything that makes any effort at more sustainable practices has to be doing some level of good. We are all far too self-serving at times, and I think that making even a small effort is better than making no effort. It's kind of like the idea of when you're depressed, it's better to half-ass something than to not even try. So it gets us on the right track towards something that could be potentially really, really great and beautiful. So with that somewhat morose note there, I am going to go ahead and take a look at my tea. So I have created a bit of a gradient here. It's definitely kind of greenish up at the top. I don't know how well you can tell that, but it's pretty greenish, and then it's got that concentrated bit of brown at the bottom. So we're going to swirl that tea bag. Look at that swirl. It's not nearly as cool as that Candy Cane Crush that just had the white chocolate swirling it out there. But, still a decent swirl. So now we're looking at a kind of an ambery color. Pretty clear. From my angle here, I can see to the bottom. And as I bring it up close to the camera here, I see a little bit of oil on the top, not a ton, really. Mostly I get mint with like a little hint of chocolate at the back there when I'm smelling. But I think I've got the right length of steep here. I rambled for quite a bit about chocolate and chocolate production. I'm not the biggest fan of this one, I'll be honest. It kind of tastes like if you have ever had an Andes mint and then you have a little bit of like chocolate still left on the wrapper, and then you lick the wrapper to get every last bit of that chocolate mint out of there. That's kind of what this reminds me of. It's very, very faintly chocolate mint. And the chocolate tastes horribly artificial. It actually reminds me a lot more of those chocolate mint candies as well. Like, so those chocolate mint candies, just the hard ones that you might get at a restaurant as your after dinner mint or whatever. That's a lot of that artificial chocolate kind of flavoring that I'm getting, which is a shame because this has real chocolate listed as an ingredient and I'm just not getting that. I'm wondering if that's the peppermint oil that might be interfering with that a little. I'm not fully sure, but I'm really not a big fan of this particular tea. I actually think this now overtakes the gingerbread blondie as my least favorite tea of my Advent set. So yeah, working on still compiling all my leaderboard stuff, so we'll show that here at the end of the video so you can see exactly where my teas are ranking and how I feel about them. But there is that, disappointing information, disappointing tea. Again, it's not a critique really against David's Tea. I don't have to love everything that they do. I just don't particularly care for this one. So with that in mind, I will see you tomorrow.